Hello, and welcome to Social Founder Stories, the podcast for everyone interested in inspirational stories about charities and social enterprises. I'm your host, Caroline Deal, and I'm the founder of two charities, the Media Trust and Together TV. I well know the joys and challenges of being a social founder. Social Founder Stories are about the amazing people who make social change happen. People who use their passions, skills, and entrepreneurial drive to make a difference and to make our world a better place. You'll hear about what makes social founders tick, how they create impact, what they struggle with, and how they overcome their challenges, or not in some cases. Social Founder Stories is brought to you by the Social Founder Network in association with Kiva, the Centre for Innovation in Voluntary Action. You can find out more about Kiva and support their innovative work at www.kiva.org.uk. So enjoy listening to Social Founder Stories, send us lots of feedback, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this podcast and also to our newsletter at www.socialfounder.org. We'd love to keep in touch with you. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Josie Naughton, the groundbreaking co-founder and chief executive of Help Refugees and their iconic brand, Choose Love. In the space of just a few years, Josie has gone from being a volunteer co-founder to being chief executive of Europe's highest profile refugee charity. Back in 2015, Josie and her other two co-founders were not prepared to sit back and watch the horrors of the refugee crisis. They jumped into what was meant to be just a one-off action to take donated supplies over to the jungle in Calais for a few weeks. A week into starting this campaign, the image of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi was all over our media, and they quickly realised that there was a huge long-term need that they just couldn't turn away from. In this episode of Social Founder Stories, we hear Josie's amazing journey of how she has grown Help Refugees into the largest grassroots distributor of aid in Europe. We hear how her own founder journey has changed beyond recognition and how she has had to, and still does, constantly develop her leadership and management skills to cope with such rapid expansion, working with high-profile celebrities and brands, organising complex logistics to deliver goods into refugee camps across Europe, and of course, raising the funds and donated goods so desperately needed by the refugees still living in horrendous conditions and uncertainty. Enjoy hearing Josie's story. It really is incredible and inspirational. Welcome to Second Home again here. Now we're with Josie Naughton, who is the amazing founder and co-founder of Help Refugees. Josie, we're thrilled to have you on this podcast series.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really brilliant. And I can't wait to hear your story, actually, because I've read little bits about your story, lots of things about your story, but there'll be loads and loads that our listeners don't know as well.
Oh, that's so nice.
Maybe just tell us a little bit about what it is now, and then you can go back in time
Okay,
to
sure.
what were the drivers and
Great. So I am co-founder and now CEO of Help Refugees. We now work in 14 countries. We fund 105 different projects.
105?
Yeah, they're completely cross-sector, so everything from search and rescue boats to children's hospitals, their education programs. We are still operational in Calais in northern France.
Yes, which is where you started.
Which is where we started, absolutely. And we now very much see ourselves as a movement rather than as a charity. We've had over 30,000 volunteers. We're over 75% crowdfunded, and we're almost at £20 million raised, which is...
£20 million raised in how long?
We're going to be 4 in about 2 weeks.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So sweet and so powerful.
Yeah.
So tell us, go back right to the beginning. So what was it? Or actually, tell us, before you even talk about Help Refugees, have you ever founded anything before? Have you ever, when you were a kid?
No, actually at school, I was always the person that was like, we should do the amnesty letters. I was always really interested in this field, I guess, at school and stuff. And then I I did anthropology at university, but I actually dropped out before the end.
Yeah. That's a classic entrepreneur thing, actually.
Is it?
To drop out of university.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I dropped out of university and I worked in a pub for a while, and then I started to work in music. So I worked in music licensing at Endemol. And then I got a job working in Coldplay's management team as personal assistant to their manager.
That must have been amazing.
It was amazing, and it's where I learned like a huge amount of what has been so important for the growth of Help Refugees.
So you were a campaigner from when you were really young, doing the amnesty
Whilst
letters.
I was young, and then I lost it a bit. But I'd imagine that I would go and work for the UN or something, and then somehow my life had taken me to music, and for a portion of my 20s, I was like, oh my God, I've really messed up.
Oh, really?
Like this, what have I done?
It's a
like,
tough age.
I've left university, but interestingly, actually, like a lot of those skills and the connections that I made through working in music have been so important now. So you just never know what your journey plan is for you, I think.
I think the founder journey is so interesting, actually. What gives somebody the impetus and the skills and the learnings and the bravery, the daring to set something up.
Yeah, I guess. So
how did this happen?
So
Help Refugees.
In August of 2015, that is when it was the height of the refugee crisis, as it was coined. So that was when the borders were kind of open. 1 million people arrived in Europe seeking sanctuary in that year, predominantly from Syria, but also from Iraq, Afghanistan, South Sudan, Eritrea. And it was the news story of the moment. And we were seeing all these images on the news that were just utterly heartbreaking, of families in boats, people crossing borders, children, just beside themselves. And I was at lunch with some friends, with Dawn Porter and Leanna Bird.
Yes.
And we were just having lunch, and I was saying, like, I feel like we have to do something. I feel like we should try and raise, like, let's put on a little event. Why don't we try and raise $1,000 and do something? Because I had always very much been a person who would put on Facebook, like, share. I always say this. I would always share articles or petitions.
Nice.
But often I hadn't even if I'm being honest, I hadn't even read the article, and maybe hadn't even signed the petition myself. And I felt like, sharing that's my bit of good deed done. Yeah. And it felt like, right, no, actually, we have to do something real and tangible.
And you were in London.
I was living in LA, actually.
Wow.
Working for Coldplay.
Yeah.
But I had come home for a month because the band and all their team were here. Yeah. So I happened to be here.
And actually, was there any talk of the refugees in America, in LA?
No, there was. It was a big news story there as well. Not as much so as here, but it was there.
So you were super conscious of everything that was going on.
And it was literally on the news constantly, especially Calais, because it's so close.
And you had this lunch. They were friends, Dawn and Liliana?
Liana. Yeah. They're friends. Yeah, really good friends. Yeah. And so we then connected to some people who were volunteering already in Calais, or had gone over to see what was going on. And they told us what items were needed.
Right.
And in fact, The Guardian had done an article talking about it, and there was the phone number of a volunteer at the bottom. I called her and was like, what do you need? So people told us that they needed tents, sleeping bags, shoes, first aid kits, various different food items. And a volunteer called Tom Radcliffe, who was working in the jungle, he had a donate page. So we kind of joined that.
Just to explain
to raise £1,000.
I'm sure everyone knows, but just remind people who are listening around the world what the jungle is.
Oh, okay. So Calais is where the UK border sits, but in northern France. And there's always been it's always been a migratory route of people trying to get to the UK. But as the refugee crisis hit, a huge camp organically formed at this border. So when we started, there were about 5,000 people there, but it grew to 10,000 people, and we became the camp management of that camp, which I'll tell you about in a second.
Okay, amazing. So sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
going back to Tom.
Yes. So we now joined this donate page. It was called we called it Help Calais, and we were then started doing social posts that were saying, if you want to help, you can donate on this page, or if you've got items, then maybe you can let us know and we'll come and collect them. But so many people started to say that they had items. So we got a one room for free at Big Yellow Storage in North Finchley. I went on my lunch break in an Uber to go and say, will you give us a room free? And they did. And then once we had that room, we were like, in fact, it was Leanna's sister suggested, why don't we do an Amazon wish list? So that would be and then people could just deliver the stuff to there.
And that would be new stuff.
And that would be new stuff, which is much better. Yeah. So we set all that up. And then I got a phone call from the Big Yellow Storage who were like, you've got 7,000 packages arriving from Amazon tomorrow.
Oh my God.
So you better get people down here to put it all away,
and
we're not.
Did you have room for them all in the one room?
No, so we had to ask for extra rooms. And then, it was a lot of this happened from Dawn's Twitter, actually, but also the links just went viral because people really wanted a way to help, but they didn't know how. So suddenly, like, the Independent put it in a piece of like, what can you do to help? So this all happened really organically and in a kind of mad way.
There was no sense of an organisation at this stage.
Absolutely not.
No. What did it feel like? What did you think you were all doing?
It just felt like crazy. This is a crazy story, but we felt very caught up in the emergency of it.
Yeah.
And also, it's like, right, well, that's happening tomorrow, so now you just have to think of a solution. So we wrote on social media, right, we really need volunteers. And then I was terrified no one would show up. But actually the next day, like 40 people showed up.
At this warehouse or in the storage space?
At the storage space,
Incredible.
yeah. And they were, people from all walks of life, kids who just finished their GCSEs, they're like ladies who had just, got over cancer treatment, grandmas, all walks of life were there. And a woman called Danny Lawrence was one of the people who arrived, and she ended up like really organising everyone and how to put everything away. She's still a trustee and on our board and has been part of our core team since the very beginning. Philly Boyle, who's our director and head of partnerships, she was also one of the people who arrived. Nico, our COO, was also one of the people who arrived. So that was just, it was an incredible time and moment.
How wonderful. And again, at the time...
But we didn't know.
You weren't thinking ahead, you were just like going with the flow.
So suddenly a guy called Ash came, who was a logistics person from a prison, and he was like, right, this is how you need to sort and pack everything. You need to palletize everything. I didn't know what a pallet was.
Yeah.
So I was
so lucky.
I always say it's like people just fell out of the sky, and they still do. It's crazy. Whenever there's an urgent need for someone, they just seem to appear.
And at this stage, you were doing everything, or the group of you were doing everything voluntarily.
Absolutely.
You weren't spending money. You were just begging, borrowing, stealing.
But this is all happening within a week. So by the end of the week, also, the photo of the little boy, Aylan Kurdi, who washed up on the shore of Turkey trying to reach Greece, which changed the world. Yeah. It really did. It changed the world. That happened. So that kind of was a catalyst as well for just, I think, an explosion of compassion in the British public and indeed the world. But for us, this probably all wouldn't have happened had in the way that it did.
Interesting.
Without that image. And without the tragic event.
That just created an exponential.
It did. And so by the end of the week, we'd raised £56,000.
Wow. And how did that happen? How did you, again, quite interested in this sort of organisational stuff of this, how did you actually set that up?
So that was all
the giving,
on a Just Giving page of private donations. Brilliant. But so there were kind of two things happening concurrently. So we now had this money, we had this stuff. We hadn't really worked out how we were going to get the money out of that page yet. But we went to Calais to kind of see who the organisation was that we would hand all of this stuff over to and the money. Yeah. And we got there and there was no big organisation working there. There was no governmental body. There was no big NGO that you would expect. And there were 5,000 people.
So no Save the Children?
No.
No Oxfam?
No one.
Nobody. Refugee organisations?
No, nobody.
That is stunning.
Just kind of civil society.
Yeah.
And some local French NGOs who've been there for years, who were used to dealing with the kind of up to 500 people that you might have at one time. That would be like a crazy amount of people. It might be 10, 20, 30. But they just didn't know how to cope. They couldn't cope with this number.
And by this time, there were you said about 5,000
people,
refugees of all ages.
Of all ages, families. That was something so striking when I first got there. You'd seen on the news, and it looked like it was so many men who still are absolutely deserving of our kindness and compassion, but it was so many more families than what you saw on the news, and children, babies without nappies on, people had no shoes on, people had nothing to eat. We met, children on their own. I didn't even know the phrase unaccompanied minor. But on that very first day, we met children completely by themselves. I mean, it's just insane. And you're like, where are child services? This is mad. So
you were wandering around trying to find organisations that could help.
And there were some key volunteers who had arrived there, who we kind of connected with, and they were saying, there needs to be organisation here, because on top of the fact that there was no support, when people were arriving just opening their boot, that could cause a riot. Like, it was so
just chaotic,
and you could just feel it was starting to get cold. It was so muddy, it felt terrifying what was going to happen. So we decided to we were still called Help Calais then, because that had been like the hashtag that had gone viral, but we partnered with a local French organisation called l'Auberge de Migrants. And we rented a warehouse, and then we started a distribution system, a shelter building program.
Incredible.
And realized that we needed to have a kind of a financial structure to be able to carry on, because we would like, right, we're gonna do this. We can't unsee what we've seen.
How did you do the practical stuff, like the shelter building and the warehouse?
So
did you have people based there?
So l'Auberge were able to we need a warehouse, so they were doing that, and then Philly and Nico, who I mentioned, they stayed in Calais and were there doing all of that organising. We were able to go on social media and say we need builders, and also through our own networks. And then people came, and the design for the structure happened, and then it was just
the physical structure.
The physical structure of the shelters.
Right.
And then we made we realized that we needed to make it that people only bought the useful items. So we made a diagram that we spread everywhere on social media and said, this is what we need. This is how you get it there. We set up email addresses that were for donations, for volunteers, and just started, but none of us really knew what we were doing.
And how were you getting the stuff across the channel? What did you do?
So we were also, people were calling up and saying that they would sponsor the cost of a lorry. We eventually, actually, Tesco gave us free lorries.
Amazing. Branded Tesco lorries?
No, actually not branded.
Oh, that's interesting.
It was mad. We would we needed installation for the shelters, and then different building companies would be contacting us, and we'd be coordinating it all. It was really crazy.
How incredible. And were you working at this time still?
But I wasn't doing a radio job. Sorry about that.
So you're working in London, not in LA?
No. And we then also we were working out what we're going to do, because once you're over £5,000 on a donations page, that money needs to be released to a charity. But we obviously weren't a charity, and it can take 6 months to register as a charity, and we needed to spend that money yesterday. So we were contacted by an organisation called Prism the Gift Fund, who were a donor advised fund.
I think our listeners will be quite interested in that.
Yeah.
So tell us quickly what Prism is and how it works.
They're an incredible organisation. They are a donor advised fund who would traditionally, for individuals who wanted to place some of their wealth in a fund and then release it to charities and use it as a charitable fund, but needed the kind of the structure around that, the finance team, or the lawyers, all that kind of thing. But they were starting a new model called a collective fund, which would basically allow small groups or organisations who wanted to register as a charity to not have to do all of that back end, which takes a lot of expertise, a lot of liability, and they would provide that. So money could go to them. They would have a kind of restricted fund that's just yours, and then when you want to spend any of that money, they have the finance team, the legal team, everyone around that to make sure it's absolutely being used for charitable purposes. You actually never touch the funds. They do. And it's kind of like a second layer of due diligence.
Yeah.
And so it meant that we could immediately have an account and begin spending that money, but also be sleeping at night knowing that we were doing everything exactly by book. And also for our donors.
And do they charge quite a lot? Do they take a percentage?
At the time they charged, how much did they charge? It was 6% a quarter and capped at a certain amount.
Right.
So it was incredible.
But really useful. And a lot cheaper than trying to set up a
my God, absolutely.
charity.
And we just wouldn't have known. We know how to do it now, but we wouldn't have known then.
So did you keep using them?
Actually, we're still with them because it's a brilliant system and it works really well.
And you haven't set up as a separate charity?
We have also set up as a separate charity, but that's kind of dormant. We don't really use it.
Interesting.
Because it just works really well with Prism. I think, we also now have big donors who donate a huge amount of funding to us. And that double layer of due diligence is brilliant. They're just brilliant. They work really well with us.
So you put that through Prism as well, the really big
everything,
donations?
All our money.
Brilliant. Do they do your accounts as well then?
They do our accounts and everything. We have 2 full-time staff now within Prism who just look after Help Refugees.
Interesting. Well, we might put a link on the Social Founder Network website,
it's
actually,
really
because
great.
I think it sounds like a really interesting resource.
It is, because also, especially when you're, that energy and that attention it takes to get something off the ground and get it to be something sustainable. Yeah. You don't necessarily have the time to be really managing all of that back end process.
And just quickly, while we're still on the money and Prism and everything, did you continue to use Just Giving, or how do you take the donations now?
Prism actually used BT My Donate. So we used BT My Donate for a long time, which was 0% commission. And then but then as we developed and our website developed, we realized we wanted to have a really slick payment interface.
Yes.
So we moved to having Stripe integrated into our website, and now we actually use Braintree.
Right. Interesting.
So
really interesting. Well,
it is. All of these things are really interesting to learn. Like over 4 years, the world has moved on a lot as well. It's like now it's really important that we have Apple Pay on our website, and you've got to keep making donating as easy as possible for people, or they won't do it. The Facebook tools have been really helpful. Instagram have just launched a donate sticker. All these things are super important.
So let's go back to you're in Calais. You've got these crazy amounts of stuff arriving and donations.
Yeah.
So how did you guys start to lead? Who became the person who was sort of giving the orders? How did you manage as a sort of group of founders? Because you were 3 founders, 3 co-founders?
We were 3 co-founders, but then all the Philly, Nico, Danny, all these women that I'm talking about were everyone was managing,
women.
All women.
How lovely.
Yeah, still predominantly.
Sorry, all my male listeners.
It's still a predominantly female-led team.
That's so interesting.
But everyone was kind of in charge of their own bit, and that was really important to make sure that people were, had roles and responsibilities very early on,
right,
to be as organised
and
as possible.
And you just worked that out collectively about who would take on.
And then gradually over time, I became the CEO, because that's just that.
How far in? When did that happen? And how did you decide that?
After a couple of months.
Quite quickly, Josie.
I didn't decide. Actually, everyone. It just happened naturally. It's just, it's just what happened in terms of how things were being driven, and also, that I really believe that the person who's folding trousers in the warehouse is as important as the CEO. Like, this is all a connected wheel. Yeah. But in terms of just where that the responsibility of making sure everything is compliant and that there is enough funding and managing the different relationships, it just happened naturally. But we're very much like a very horizontal team, and everyone works so hard, and everything wouldn't work without all the other people who are working here. You
were saying earlier about how you'd learnt so many skills working with Coldplay and in other jobs you've done. Were there particular skills that you thought you felt confident that you could do, like, organising?
I think it's kind of, stuff like, there was a naivety to us having never worked in the sector before. So when we arrived in Calais, it's like, oh, well, why don't people have anywhere to sleep, and why don't people have anything to eat? And like, obviously there should be some form of child protection here. Whereas I think people from the sector were like, but it's complicated because of this and this and this, but we didn't know that. And then I think also in the job that I'd had before, it's like, if people wanted to have lunch on the moon tomorrow, you just have to make that happen. So no wasn't really an option. Yeah. And I think that was really helpful. And then to kind of go back to the story, when I was then in London and a lot of our team were now in Calais really running that, we were now registering with Prism, but to continue to raise funds, we really needed to utilize social media. So we opened our Instagram, our Facebook, our Twitter.
Yep.
We also had been speaking to volunteers in Greece on Facebook and realized that there was a huge need there. So we changed to Help Refugees rather than Help Calais, because it felt very clear that we couldn't just be helping in that one place, and the desperate need was everywhere.
And you'd always, right from the beginning, you'd done a lot with the Twitter hashtag,
yes,
the Help Calais
Help
one.
Calais.
And that had been a big driver of everything.
It had. Help Calais was huge. And then it became Help Refugees very quickly. And then again, from my skills before, understanding branding, getting a good logo, understanding social media and the importance of that, understanding the talking with your community, how important that is, understanding logistics from like touring, for example. There were all these things that you wouldn't think would be helpful, but they were. So we now had become Help Refugees. Just to touch on what had happened in Greece, I had seen a volunteer saying that she was on the island of Lesbos, a woman called Meryl, who on Lesbos, there were 10,000 people arriving every single day. People were drowning.
Horrendous.
She was saying that there were so many children. They were sleeping outside. It had been raining for 10 days and they desperately needed doctors. So I wrote on Facebook, is anyone a doctor? We'll fly you to Greece and put you up on Airbnb.
Yeah.
Now I look back in horror and didn't actually check as to whether anyone was a doctor or not, but we just trusted and flew them. Luckily, everybody was.
And the safeguarding thing as well. You just
we didn't know about safeguarding. Now, obviously, we are, safeguarding is something we're so proud of and is an extreme priority, and we have all these systems and processes. But we just didn't know.
You just jumped in and did it. You needed to. And again, no other big organisations were really
So we flew 20 doctors to Greece. And
from the UK.
From the UK. And then realised that, oh my God, the same thing was happening there. But civil society, amazing organisations were stepping up. There were people who were doing distribution, who were doing food. Yeah. Some of them were international, a lot of them were local. But they didn't necessarily even have organisations that could absorb funding. So there was a woman, for example, who was cooking food for 1,000 people a day, but she didn't have any money or an organisation. So we set up an account at the local supermarket. And some of the lorries that we were sending from our big yellow storage were also going to Greece.
Right.
So we now had become Help Refugees. We were building up this community with the public, who were seeing on social media when we were saying, could you donate money for tents? Could you send this stuff on the Amazon wish list? And then they would see it arrive because we were able to show it arriving. And that became something really important with us from the
media
get-go.
Stuff. It's interesting actually, because our next big event for Social Founders is all around the brand of the founder versus the brand of the organisation and social media and things.
Yeah.
So your experience will be really, really interesting for that.
Oh, definitely. And we were very much a brand rather than individuals.
And even rather than an organisation, from what you're saying. You almost...
Well,
did you set up a company, a private company?
We set up, so at that time we registered with Prism, and then we set up as a company, a limited company. Yeah. Partly because we went to see lawyers very quickly. And they advised us that in order to do advocacy, you can't do that under the charitable arm. So for any advocacy, and that was something we really wanted to do from the get-go, because it felt like we can't, giving people food and a shelter is just a plaster.
I really want to ask you more about that.
So we need to do advocacy. So,
and you're doing a lot more of that now, aren't you? But we'll come on to that.
Sorry,
hopefully.
it's like
There's
such
so
a
much,
wide story.
So much I want to ask you about.
Confusing.
And going back to the Greece, so you're now working a lot in Calais, you're working a lot in Greece.
So in Calais, we're the operation. Although even although we're operational, there's different civil society organisations who we're funding. So this model is already growing. So there's Refugee Community Kitchen, there was Calais Kitchens, there was a Women and Children's Centre, and they all had their own leadership teams and founders and everything. And we were funding them, but working collaboratively as well,
and helping them as well.
Yeah, exactly. We were all supporting each other, but we kind of became an umbrella. But
had you given up your day job by this time? When you became CEO?
I finished work, a few months later.
So you sort of juggled. This is actually a classic founder thing. It starts off as a side project and then slowly takes over your life.
Totally.
And so you juggled both for a long time.
Yeah.
Roughly how long?
A few months.
Yeah. That must have been crazy.
But a lot of the others didn't have, were like out, had just in between jobs and that kind of thing, which is why they've been able to volunteer.
Right.
Because not everyone can volunteer. You know, if people have got jobs and kids and all that kind of thing,
rent to pay, or a mortgage,
but then those people want to help, so they can donate £5, or they could come and sort at the big yellow storage in London. So everyone has a different way of helping.
How did it feel when you moved from giving up your main income to doing Help Refugees? And did you feel very nervous, or did it just feel very organic and natural?
Well, I really don't think until even about a year ago it felt like anything other than like, this is an emergency and this is just what you have to be doing as a human being. And it never felt like, oh wow, we have this organization, or like, oh wow, it's just constantly felt like, how are we possibly gonna raise enough money to support all these organizations who are doing this amazing work, and how on earth are we going to let the world know that there are children still dying, or that there are children still being put in detention centers throughout Europe? Or we very quickly began, so when we were working in Greece, we started to support all these different organizations on the islands, all civil society organizations, but then people were telling us, oh, there are people on the mainland too who really need support. And then it was also in the Balkans, and it was also in Italy. And actually we were meeting so many Syrians, and people were like, I feel so awful for my family back home. So we very early on, in November 2015, bought 2 ambulances for the white helmets. And that began our relationship and network with organizations working in Syria. And it was exactly the same thing there as it was we saw everywhere else in Europe, that it wasn't the big INGOs and it wasn't governments who were doing the actual life-saving frontline work. It was civil society-led organizations who still have incredibly high standards. I don't want to do a disservice saying things like civil society-led or grassroots, because they're incredible. But that they were doing the work and receiving none of the funding. So we were able to offer this platform and funding and also fund in a way that was very different to large NGOs, which was very needs led. So because we weren't we didn't have the knowledge, we didn't come in saying, oh, it should be done like this. We just said, what do you need? And people would be like, I need funding for fuel, because we've got funding for teachers, but we don't have funding for fuel for the school, and the children can't learn because they're freezing. Or we've been donated loads of boots, but we don't have any money for the cars to get the boots there. And so we just began this system of like, right, what needs to happen is we need to work fast, flexibly, and be needs led, and be needs led by what's on the ground, and also by the refugees themselves. Like, what's amazing about a lot of these organizations, or in fact all of them, is that they work so closely with the communities and are led by what the communities want. And, you know, they know what they need. It's very, it's quite colonial sometimes, I think, this sector, where people come in and say, this is what you need.
Do-goody and patronizing. A lot of the founders that we work with, there's always this issue externally about, are there too many charities, and why have you set up another organization? Why aren't you working with the ones that exist already? So did that come up sometimes? Did you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, also we in the beginning were like, we shouldn't be doing this. We have no idea what we're doing. So it was like going and knocking on the door of the big organizations and being like, I don't know if you know, but there are like hundreds of children who are like sleeping in the mud in Calais, and expected them to go, oh my God, we had no idea, we'll sort this out for you. But actually, for reasons of bureaucracy, for reasons of people being government funded, for a million reasons that I could go into and it would take hours, they weren't able, or couldn't, or didn't want to, in some cases, help. And so we did have to do it, and our partners did have to do it. And we, it's complicated. I think now we're very aware that there is a real need for what we do. But for a long time, it was like, we don't want to be doing this. This is not what we should be doing. And the second that we don't have to do it, we won't do it anymore. And so we're constantly trying to get people to do it.
And did you feel almost angry with the big boys
Absolutely.
in the sector?
But then, it's interesting, because it's just the context of this crisis is so different, and it moves so quickly. And all of these systems that have previously existed have been created for very good reasons, but they just don't fit right now. And sometimes these organizations are so big and bureaucratic, and the individuals working in them are incredible and do incredible work. And these organizations, they do things on a large scale that's incredible. But it's these bits that slip through the cracks. And that's what we are able to do well. And so now actually we work, in coordination with all of these big organizations, and we can't do the big things that they can, and we can do the small things, and they will tell us, there's going to be this gap. Can you fill that? And we will say, we desperately need, help with this.
Yeah.
But of course, as well, we're trying to hold these big organizations to account because we live in a very different world now, and
they're getting millions from the big agencies.
Absolutely.
And from their huge, massive fundraising campaigns.
Absolutely.
But not managing to get into the grassroots.
Exactly, and maybe there's too many steps from the head office to the ground. And also sometimes now, like, this crisis is humanitarian, but it's actually political. And the only solution for it is to be like calling out the politics, and also being able to not be led by the politics and how you support people. And that independence is something that's very important to us.
So when there's a Mail headline saying there's too many charities, what would you say about that?
I would say that is just, we live in a world where inequality is so huge. And whilst there are people suffering and the inequality is this big, there can never be too many charities. But I would say that charity needs to be done better. But I think it's so dangerous to be criticizing the work charities are doing, rather than criticizing the root causes for what's going on. It's not that we need to not be funding charities. It's that we need to be addressing root causes.
I think that the founder urge that's in people wanting to set up charities, social enterprises, organizations going to change a community, change the world, change lives is so strong. And that to any way stop that is crazy. So I think
I really feel that, like, we can't live in this very privileged world that we live in here in London, and know that just down the road, other people, or in fact anywhere in the world, people are living in war or having to get in boats and risk their child's life for safety. Really because of our foreign policies, because of the way the system in the world works. And until that is all addressed, we all have a responsibility to be doing something about it.
We'll come on a bit later to the campaigning work that you're doing now, because I really want our listeners to hear about that. But I'm, again, really interested in how you, as an individual, sort of changed in the role. How did your role start to change as chief executive now of an organization that's getting millions in funding, working with thousands of other organizations? The logistics must be a nightmare.
Yeah.
How did your role change? And you're still doing a lot of the external work, the social media work, the profile, what did you end up doing?
I guess it was very much like, I always feel uncomfortable talking about myself as an individual because it really is a team effort. But I guess it's like, what my role holds is like an understanding of the projects that we're working on, an understanding of how we serve them best and how we get the money to them, continuing to fundraise and make sure that there's enough money in the bank at the end of every month. Because we very much, it's not like we had this annual budget and then we worked out this will go here, this will go here. Like, we literally every month had no idea how we were going to continue to fund everyone, and everyone not reliant on us because people have their own funding streams as well, but that, and then working out. So there's like relationships with private donors, there's relationships with the public through our social media. Then there's also like making sure that volunteers needed to be supported to be able to stay, and that was really important to provide a consistent service to beneficiaries. I don't really like the word beneficiaries, to the communities that we're supporting.
And you're leading on a lot of the fundraising work.
Yes, and then putting on events became a big thing of the way that we were fundraising.
Of course, yes. And again, a skill that you have.
Yeah. In November 2015, we put on a gig at the Kentish Town Forum. Paloma Faith headlined, Richard Bacon chaired it. There was it was a great night. We had refugee performers as well. Kate Tempest.
Oh, I wish I'd been there.
And we for that gig, how do you raise money? So someone else who had been connected to us very early in the beginning, a guy called Hayden Prowse, who was hugely involved at the start. Yeah. He was best friends with Catherine Hamnett's son. So he asked if Catherine Hamnett. So for those who don't know, Catherine Hamnett was a very famous designer in the 80s and 90s and still now.
Yeah.
And she designed the Choose Life t-shirt that Wham were very famous for wearing, and then lots of slogan t-shirts that were always had an activist or social message. So it was a huge coup to get to her. And we asked if she would design the t-shirt, and she said yes. And we were talking about what that t-shirt should say. Yeah. Should it say Help Refugees, which was now our name?
Yeah.
Should it say Refugees Welcome? Uh-huh. Should it say, a host of other things? And we had been talking about that, as you just said, what is that thing that made you change your life?
Yeah.
And from that very first trip to Calais, looking human beings in the eyes, and just the humanity of it. These people could be you, they could be me, I had children, my children, it could be my mum. It's literally just that we have been dealt a different hand of cards.
Yeah.
And so this isn't political, it's humanitarian. So she said, why don't we just change Choose Life to Choose Love?
Oh, how nice.
And
so it's her idea.
It was her idea. Great. She's an incredible woman. We work so closely with her. Still, she's now become like a great friend to me. She, when I'm like home from traveling, she'll cook me roast chicken. And,
lovely. Is she based here still in London?
She lives in East London, just down the road from me.
Nice.
And she's an incredible, inspiring woman. But we didn't ever imagine that t-shirt would go on for anything past the gig. But people loved it and connected to it in a way that's just incredible. So we thought, right, well, this is like a thing. And so I then asked quite a few celebrity people that I knew from my previous life, as did Dawn and Leanna, if they would wear the t-shirt on Instagram. And then we thought we're thinking about the ALS challenge. And
just explain to people what the ALS challenge is.
The ALS challenge is the ice bucket challenge, when I'm sure people remember, people poured ice on people's heads, and they did it for, and then people would donate to,
and it just went crazy on social media,
and it raised millions and millions, and actually had a huge impact in the world. So I think charities all over are like, and we still are too, like, how can we recreate the ice bucket challenge? And this was a very, very small, tiny version. But we were like, we'll get people to do a selfie in their t-shirt and then say, you can buy your t-shirt too, and then post it. And 100% of the profits go to the front line. But also it's completely ethically made. And then it's like a badge of honor to show kind of what you care about and what you feel.
I see people walking around in the t-shirts all over London.
Me too. I still burst into tears, or I like inane, madly smile at someone and they're like, why is she smiling at me? Because they obviously don't know.
Oh. Yeah. How much have the t-shirts made for you, roughly?
Coming just over 750,000 so
Incredible.
far.
But it's not just the t-shirt, as you say, it's the brand.
It's
and the
everything.
awareness.
So now, it's hashtag. We started to put after every post, when we would do like, here, thank you so much for your donations. This is now funding a child-friendly space in this camp. These children didn't even have any activities, and now we make sure that they have got juice and a snack and activities. Like hashtag Choose Love, and that just became so part of our identity. And now people have like Choose Love parties, and they cycle from one end of the country to the other to raise funds for us in their Choose Love t-shirt. And Choose Love Choose Love is actually the movement.
And you're keeping Help Refugees still. I wondered if at one stage you were going to change the name of the organisation.
We have a conversation probably once a week about, is it weird that we have both things, that we're Help Refugees and that we're Choose Love? Should we combine it? Should we just be one of them? Like, it's something that we still kind of wrestle with.
Right.
But essentially, Help Refugees is the organisation and Choose Love is the movement.
Which is probably quite good to keep the sense of a strong organisation.
Yeah,
around the movement, underneath.
It is. It's kind of like Tesco, every little helps. Or Marmite, love it or hate it, I guess. But it is something, and in terms of like Instagram, Choose Love is a lot more visible than Help Refugees. And we wonder sometimes if we're losing... it sounds so lame to talk about, we're losing followers because people might search Choose Love but they don't find anything because we're called Help Refugees.
Right.
And another I don't know if we'll come on to this, but one of our huge fundraising tools is a shop that we now do.
Tell us about that now then.
So we very early on, right from the beginning, in fact, were bringing over politicians and journalists to come to all the places that we were working to say, look, this is the real situation on the ground.
And when you say bringing over politicians and journalists from the UK.
From the UK.
And from other countries
and
as
a
well?
bit from other countries, but predominantly the UK, but also from America, from New York Times, from places.
Taking them to Calais,
taking them to Greece,
Syria,
the Balkans. We would connect them to people in Syria. But yes, Lebanon, Jordan, later. And so we've specially built up a relationship with The Guardian. And another thing that we'll talk about is our advocacy around unaccompanied minors. And The Guardian really partnered with us on that. So in the winter of 2016, we were the Guardian charity partner, or one of 3, for their winter Christmas campaign.
Yeah, which has been so influential for so many small charities.
It's just incredible what it did for us. But it raised us over £600,000, which got us through December, January and February, and it was freezing and there were babies sleeping in tents, and I just literally don't know what we would have done without that funding. Because
at that stage you were still pretty much hand to mouth, in the sense you had nothing in the bank to fall back on.
I mean, we still are basically hand to mouth, to be honest. But you know, we have sustainable funding now, but it's still only 1/6 of our income, and the needs are they're greater than they ever were, and it's not in the media as much. But so we had been that, and then in 2017. We just had no idea how we were going to raise that amount of funding again in such a short amount of time. And we were really, really aware of it. And a guy that we had been working with called James Turner, who worked at the Syria campaign. So we'd worked on various different parts of what was happening in Syria together. He had since left and set up an organisation called Glimpse, who were a kind of group of creatives using their skills for good.
Nice.
And I'd also worked quite a lot with his wife, who was also an activist and campaigner, and they had been on their honeymoon and they had been talking about that Amazon wish list. And he was like, it'd be really cool to do a shop that was, you know, kind of anti-consumer, where people could be essentially a version of the Amazon wish list, where people could come in, buy the stuff, and it would get delivered to the people who really needed it. So he came into the office, mentioned this to me, and I said I thought this was an amazing idea. Went to the team. Everyone else also thought it was an amazing idea. And we began working together on this concept. So in 2016, we opened a physical store in Soho.
Soho, London.
That was called the Choose Love shop. And it looked really cool. It looked a bit like an Apple store. We wanted to kind of reinvent the charity shop. And we had a beautiful big Choose Love sign that was made out of an emergency blanket, but that would be cool for people to have on their Instagram. And then this long table, like in an Apple store, down the middle of the shop. We split it into 3 sections. So arrival, shelter, and the future, which are kind of the 3 points of someone's journey that we support them on in lots of different ways. Yeah. And then on the table were just everyday items. So you would think that you're just coming in to buy them. So a child's coat, an emergency blanket, a tent, a food pack, a hygiene pack. But you come in, and rather than take any of those items away, you buy them and you leave with nothing except the feeling of love. And we delivered them to people who really needed them.
Perfect. And it got a lot of coverage.
It got a huge amount of coverage. People connected to it in a way that we could never have anticipated. We had an online version of the store as well. We used influencers to come in and create bars and explain to people that they could do this online or come into the store. We had gift cards, so you could give it as someone's present for the holidays and say, like, the card had a beautiful picture on. We really pride ourselves on always using like beautiful imagery, people with agency, you know, moving away from the like poverty porn kind of thing that's been done before. It's a beautiful image, and it says like, "Dear Mum, I have bought you a blanket this year, but you're not going to find it under the tree. Instead, Help Refugees will deliver it to someone who really needs it."
Fantastic.
We, by this point, have also learned that getting stuff delivered on Amazon in the UK and then trekking it across to another country in a lorry is not the best way of doing aid. So now we always buy locally in the countries that we work. And support the local economies. It's much more environmentally friendly. So now when you buy the child's coat in the store, we're buying children's coats in Greece, we're buying children's coats in Lebanon, or it might be that we have a system of a warehouse there where that's being donated and then the funds are being used to support the distribution of that item. Perfect.
It's interesting how you're always learning on your founder journey.
Absolutely.
So have you still got the shop?
So the shop was a pop-up from Black Friday to Christmas Eve, and we launched it on Black Friday to be like on Black Friday when everyone's queuing up to buy loads of stuff they don't need, actually, why don't you buy something for someone who really needs it?
Perfect timing. You're so good at all the media stuff. And did you get that donated as well, the shop donated?
Yes, we did, from a company called Shaftesbury, who are amazing. And then, so that year it raised £750,000.
Perfect.
And then last year we did it in New York Soho and London Soho. And we raised basically 2 million.
At the same time, by the
exactly
way.
The same time. Both Black Fridays, Christmas Eve was completely insane and mad. This year it was amazing. Banksy donated us a sculpture that he had pop up in our London store, and people could guess the weight of the. It was a sculpture of a boat of refugees that was from Dismaland, and it was a raffle, so you could guess the weight of the boat for £2, and then the closest guess won the boat.
Wow. Who won the boat?
Someone, actually, they wanted to remain anonymous, so I can't say, but they were a huge fan, which was lovely.
Oh, fantastic. Now, tell us a little bit about, I just want to hear all the sort of the great stories, but we also really want to hear about, again, your process. So who's your team? How do you delegate loads of stuff? How do you what's the setup?
So we are, as I said, so Prism manage all our accounts in the back end. And we have 2 people completely employed just under Help Refugees. They're managing everything day to day, all our payments and transactions.
In Prism,
but they're Help Refugees.
Yeah.
And then within there's the wider Prism team who also all work on what we're doing.
Yes.
And then in London, there's myself as CEO. We have Nico, our COO.
So Nico does the sort of operations
and programs, but it's still all very collaborative. We're all kind of involved in everything, but as time's going on, we're learning to delegate more of it. It's hard.
It's so hard.
And then we have 2 people in our programs team. In fact, 3 now. And then we have a head of communications, a head of digital, although we're changing the job role names actually at the moment.
And are they all based here in this second home office in London?
Most of the time, but sometimes people travel a lot.
Yeah.
So then we have kind of partnerships, but that's predominantly like fundraising and events. And then we've got 4 other roles within the office who are all kind of supporting all of those other aspects. And then, so the digital is doing the website and everything. And we have, in fact, the comms is split into 2 roles.
This is a tiny team.
It's a tiny team. We're like 10 in London.
And do you have volunteers who are actually doing a lot of the actual running of the organisation?
Yeah, we have like a WhatsApp group in London that's called Choose Love Crew. So when we have events and stuff, volunteers will come and and be there and selling the t-shirts or waitressing at the restaurant when we've got a restaurant or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then in Calais, we have 2 field managers, and then there can be up to sort of 100 volunteers a day there. And then we also have about 8 to 10 people on stipends who are like long-term volunteers. But then we're also funding, in part, 8 organisations working in Calais. And then within those teams, there are people employed or there are more volunteers on stipends, and we're paying accommodation. And so it's kind of like a spider structure.
A network, yes, I like that.
And then we have probably, so in Greece is about half our project work. We're funding sort of between around 60 organisations there. There's 75,000 refugees trapped in Greece.
So how do you do all the due diligence? That's Prism, is it? Or
Prism, but then we have a team of 4 field managers in Greece.
Right.
Because that's where so much
employed
of our work is.
by Help Refugees. Right.
And they are constantly checking in with the projects, understanding the context, doing the due diligence on a day-by-day basis. And then we also have WhatsApp groups with everyone. So people can say, this is happening today, oh my gosh, we need help with this. And we have a presence on the ground. We travel a lot so that if I'm speaking to a donor, I want to look them in the eyes and say, I know exactly where that money's going, and I know that this is the most needed.
Because you're heading off to Greece tonight, aren't you?
I'm literally heading off tonight. But our teams on the ground are the eyes and ears of the organisation. So we have the team in France, the team in Greece, and then everywhere else, the projects team are travelling. And we've had a field manager in Italy, a field manager in Lebanon.
And do you have a board?
Yes. So we have Prism's board. And their board of trustees and everything has to go through. And then Help Refugees also has quite a small board, and then an advisory board of people who are experts in different areas. Right. And that's all in the process of becoming more formalized at the moment.
And again, is that sort of the structure changing all the time? You said
All
you
the
set
time.
up a charity that's
Developing.
kind of dormant, but you use Prism.
It's
And do you have to set up separate companies in Greece and France, or can you do it all from the company structure here?
It's complicated. We have had a charity in Greece, but actually when we were working operationally, but now we don't work operationally, so we've dissolved that organisation.
Because your operations are done by your partner organisations.
Exactly.
Right.
We are essentially a funder,
right.
but it's a funder with a difference.
And the logistics of all the transporting stuff, is that done by your partners now?
We don't really do that much anymore. But then actually this summer we have done 2 lorries to Greece, and then Lauren in our team, who's amazing, she's organised all of that. And then the lorry arrives there, and there's all the different paperwork that you have to
you're
fill
right.
in.
You were saying earlier how you now you source everything locally.
Yeah, but we have done some, like, so people here have been able to bring their blankets and shoes and school equipment and all that kind of thing, because that had worked in that moment. It's worked out cheaper to actually send a lorry of aid, and we do that as us. And then there's also now a sister organisation in the US called Choose Love Inc.
It's interesting that they're called Choose Love as well.
So, I mean...
And do you control that organisation? Do you have ownership of it, or is it independent?
There is an independent board, but we are still... I'm the CEO of that organisation, and Nico is the COO. But it's an independent board, and it's a sister organisation. It's not the same organisation.
Interesting. That'll be interesting to watch how that evolves. Actually,
well, because we have the shop in New York this last year, and then now we have a shop in New York and LA.
Yeah. Now we're not gonna forget the campaigning, because that's really important. But I want to ask you, how do you? A lot of our founders in our network, when we all get together at events and things like that, there's a lot that comes out about the tough times, and sometimes feeling quite lonely, and resilience, and difficult. Who do you talk to when things are tough? How do you cope? You're so positive and so full of amazing energy and creativity and passion for this project. Do you get those moments?
Oh
when
my
you
gosh!
think,
So much.
Shit.
Yeah.
And how do you cope?
Sometimes like, oh my God, what on earth are we / I doing? And like oh my gosh, the responsibility and the liability, and what are we going to do? We going to let everyone down? I very much, it's so cheesy, but I don't like the phrase lonely at the top, because there's no top, but that having the responsibility is lonely.
You see, it's so hard to imagine you with your amazing positive personality feeling like that, but all our founders say the same thing.
It's really hard.
And how do you personally cope? What do you have?
Because we have such an amazing team, and we really feel one unit, and we all help each other through those moments. Because everyone, all of us, we're a small team, so we're all shouldering so much. We all have those moments, and just sharing it and helping, pick each other up when we're having those moments. Self-care in the beginning was working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and now it's it's important to take weekends, or at least try to, and go to therapy and have a nice bath and light a candle before you go to bed.
So you just make a positive effort to make sure that is part of your life.
Absolutely, you just you have to, because otherwise you can't. You get burnout and you can't continue, and that's not responsible.
And you've talked about how people like Catherine Hamnett and your amazing network of contacts.
That's it.
Do you have people who are either formally or informally your sort of mentors and advisors?
I have to say, I get really emotional about how much people support us and how much people are there for us, and it is a movement, and there are so many people who are have had hugely successful careers, who are just on the end of the phone for us, and always there for advice, and people from the formal sector, and we're so lucky to be surrounded by so many incredible people. But it is hard. It really is hard. It is hard to continue to have that energy and that drive, and there's a balance between, gosh, am I being egotistical? Like, does this have to be me? And like working through all of that as well. And like, it's hard.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that. This thing of the founder brand.
Yeah.
And is it a negative thing?
Yeah.
And is it going to become too much an ego?
Yeah, and you have to keep yourself in check as well, I think.
And do the old founders, do you all get together sometimes and just sort of have time when you're looking back and thinking, well, this is our journey over the last only 4 years, Josie. It's nothing.
It's
really.
nothing. No, so Dawn and Leanna
aren't
involved in the day-to-day anymore. And then, as I mentioned, Danny is a trustee, and then Nico and Philly are in the core team, and then there are other people as well who are in the core team who've all been there since the beginning. So everyone does, absolutely. We all
you all muck in.
We all muck in, and we all have those moments. But it has only been over the last year that there's been any sense of achievement, because it's always been about the emergency, and it still is now. It's looking forward. It's like right now thinking, oh my God, like there are tens of thousands of people in camps in Greece who have very little access to anything. What are we going to do about that? Right now, the situation in Calais is awful. Oh my God, there's unaccompanied minors here. Oh my God, the boats can't dock in Italy. How can we support our partners who are there? How can we be raising as much awareness? How can we raise as much funds as possible? How there are 1 million children trapped in Idlib being bombed every single day, and the world isn't talking about it. What can we do? It's always looking forward rather than backwards.
It's so interesting you saying that. It reminds me of when I used to run the Media Trust. There's that sense of you're never doing enough.
Yes.
And you could be doing so much more all the time.
All the time.
And I think that's, again, being a founder of a charity or a social enterprise or a social impact organisation, there's constantly that sense of you're never doing enough and never quite making enough impact.
Yeah, no, there really is. But then you've also got to balance that with, like, as time's gone on, you don't have to. We're still young, but there's no excuse anymore for every I to not be dotted and every T not be crossed. Whenever we talk about growing or scaling, it's got to be growing and scaling well.
Yeah.
And kind of being okay to pause and say, actually, we can't do anymore, and we need to just tighten up everything that we're doing now. We're quite in a phase of that. At the moment, it's like we grew a bit too much, and now we need to like catch up with ourselves.
How far ahead are you actually formally planning?
Not past the end of December, really. Like
you don't have like a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, or
no.
Apparently Google doesn't either. So you're in good company.
We talk about it a bit, and we do strategy sessions where we will talk about that. But like essentially, we don't know that we don't know what the situation will be, and we don't know that people will still want to donate to us. So we don't know, except we do know that we will always work our hardest, and as long as there is a need, we will always try and fulfill it and be flexible.
That's a good moment to start talking about the campaigning work that you're doing.
As I said, like from the second we arrived in Calais, we were like, this is insane. And literally, I think like went into the Guardian and like knocked on people's office doors and said, will you please come and talk about this? And using connections of getting people there, getting politicians to come. And then a big thing was the number of unaccompanied children living in the camp. There were children as young as 9 living outside, sleeping in the mud, and it just felt outrageous and not okay. And in the January of 2016, a boy called Masood, who was 15, trying to reach his sister in Afghanistan, died trying to cross illegally. He died on a lorry, and it just felt like this is not okay. And so we did an Instagram post, and I was like asking people to share it. And there were some people who were working in the camp also around this issue of unaccompanied minors and starting to think about how we can legally get them out. And I got connected to a man called George Gabriel, who had set up an organisation called Safe Passage. And I had in fact started writing him an email about like, I think we could do this. And he replied like, no, we know what we're doing. Like, that's not helpful. And I was like, okay, how can we be helpful? And so basically we wanted to find a way for the children to be legally brought to the UK that had a right to be in the UK, because the journey was so dangerous. And so many of the children did have a legal right, it turned out. So a huge number of the children there were there because they were trying to meet their family in the UK. Yes. And what's interesting is people like think about Calais like, oh my God, there's a run on the border. But there were 10,000 people out of 1 million who had arrived in Europe. It's a very small number of people who were there and trying to reach the UK. And the majority of them were there with a legitimate reason. So a lot of these kids, imagine you're 12 from Syria and all your family has been killed, and the only living relative you have is an uncle in the UK. Well, if there's no safe and legal way for you to reach them, you will have to do the other way, which is so awful and opens a child to so much risk from traffickers and exploitation. So So Safe Passage were doing an amazing thing, which was to be getting the children, individual lawyers, to try and break open this legal route, which did exist. They should legally allowed to be with their family, but there was no way of them accessing that route. So we began partnering with them, with both funding them to do that, and working together on strategy with celebrities, politicians, getting media, and really, really campaigning around that issue. So we began working with Lord Alf Dubs and other organisations, including Save the Children, on the Dubs Amendment, which was basically an amendment to the Immigration Act that said that we would bring in at first 3,000 unaccompanied children from Europe, much like we had in the kinder transport in World War II.
Yes.
It's something Britain's very proud of, is that we took in all these unaccompanied children. It's strange that we aren't so proud of it now. Or we are still so proud of it, but we don't want to do it again. So we began working with ALF, with Safe Passage, and lots of other organisations on this campaigning. We really got it to become, it was front page of newspapers.
Yes.
It was in the media. It was in the news. We brought Lily Allen over. We got the Daily Mail to do a sympathetic story to child refugees.
I was going to ask you about the Mail, actually, because you do a lot with the Guardian, but I'm always encouraging charities to work with the Mail.
The Telegraph, the Times, the Mail, the Sun. We managed to get all of them, brilliant. To do sympathetic stories. And so eventually the Dubs Amendment got passed as law. But not as 3,000 children, as an unspecified number, because it had to ping pong through the Lords and the Houses of Parliament. But for 6 months, just nothing happened. It had been passed as law and nothing happened. And then in the October of 2016, the Calais camp was being demolished. And there was no plan for what was going to happen to the children. At that time, there were 1,000 unaccompanied minors. And we were really just didn't know what to do. So we were very lucky to be connected to Lee Day, the legal organisation, and to a solicitor called Rosa Curling, who...
We'll put notes, by the way, on the website about all these organisations so that people can look them up.
I said legal organisation, but they're a human rights organisation, Lee Day, essentially. And they, pro bono, began working with us so we litigated against the Home Office for their failure to implement the Act.
Incredible.
How
did you personally?
But again, I feel mad now. It's actually crazy to be sure, we'll sue the Home Office.
So you're constant. If you think back, right from day one, when you rented that one room for storage.
It's absolutely mad. But all of these things, there was so much risk involved in everything, and there's a fearlessness that is really important,
and a determination.
And there is. But
and you just take a deep breath and you do these things.
And you just do them.
And you rely presumably enormously on a network of support and advice. And
absolutely. So much. Nothing's taken lightheartedly, but also it is done quickly.
Going right back to your original skills in the music industry when you're having to run events for Coldplay or whatever.
And that the same, knowing how to run with a music act, knowing how to organise the trip for the press to come and all that stuff. It's been exactly the same for this.
Yeah, great skills.
But so we litigated against the Home Office. Within a couple of weeks, 200 children were transferred from the Calais camp to the UK. The most vulnerable, so the under 12s, the girls. They put a criteria that it was those from Syria and South Sudan, and we challenged that together again with other organisations privately as well, to say that the criteria needed to be vulnerability-led, not country-led. That one. But then in early 2017, the government announced that the scheme would be closed at 350 places because that was the only capacity of local authorities. And we knew there was so much public willingness for this scheme, for Dubs, that we challenged that and said that actually no, their consultation with local authorities was not done properly. And in our evidence, they found another 130 places, so the number became 480. And during all of this time, the situation was desperate. There were thousands of children in Greece sleeping outside, unaccompanied children. Italy, thousands again. Around 1,000 in northern France. Kids living in the worst possible conditions. So it was an emergency, and all of this time was just, it still boggles my mind that this could have all taken so long.
And how are you campaigning now for stuff moving forward?
So in terms of dubs, we lost our next two parts of the case. We had some slight wins in terms of how process works, but the number is still 480. But those places are still not filled.
That's crazy,
which is crazy.
Yeah.
So we're still campaigning around that. I have to say our everything's a balance because we're a small team, and so the humanitarian needs have been so great as the spotlight from this crisis has pulled away and the funding has pulled out. That less of our energy has been able to go into that advocacy part, but we're kind of at the moment working out how we can bring that back to the forefront.
Yeah.
But the unaccompanied children is always like one of our main priorities. And then we've done a lot of campaigning this summer around the situation in Syria, talking about the situation in Idlib. There's 3 million civilians, 1 million children trapped. They're being bombed every single day by the Assad regime in Russia.
Yeah.
No one is doing anything.
Yeah.
So we did a letter on the anniversary of Jo Cox's death with her sister to the party leaders and prospective at that time party leaders, asking what they were going to do for the 1 million children.
And did that get good coverage?
It got good coverage, and we got good pickup, and we got replies from everybody. But again, it's just words, it's not action, and this is what needs to change in our world right now. Like, there's just words everywhere, and what we need to see is action and way to really make change. And we need our leaders to step up for what is right and what is good.
It's so hard, isn't it? Because the global organisations feel very weak at the moment.
Well, they are. They're very weak.
And even some of the big global refugee charities don't.
But this is the thing. We're in a time where all of these systems and institutions that we've relied on for so long aren't working.
What are the next? Just to sort of sum up, what do you think are the next 2 or 3 big challenges for Help Refugees, and for you personally as an amazing founder, chief executive?
Well, we're kind of in the process. We're going to do the shops this year in LA, New York, and London. So that is like a big piece of work.
Around Christmas time again.
Yeah, same Black Friday to Christmas Eve. So I just have to hope that people respond again, and we are able to to raise the funds that we need again for our partners to get through the winter.
And that'll create an amazing spotlight as well on the issue.
Yeah. And then how do we remain relevant?
Yeah.
How do we grow and keep those core values of being led by the ground, led by the people we support, being fast, being flexible, having dignity, humanity, hope and respect at the heart of everything we do, whilst having to formalize as well, and funding coming from different places and getting funding from larger institutions. I think we will never accept government funding because we need to remain independent. But just how do we navigate that? There's also a trend now for humanitarian work to become criminalized. What's that going to look like for us in the countries that we're working on, our partners?
Wow.
That feels pretty scary. Are we going to be allowed to do this work still in the current political climate?
Yeah. So you've got some enormous challenges ahead.
Yeah.
You're at such a key stage, 4 years into the organisation. Yeah. You've made history in some way in the charity sector, or in the social impact sector.
Yeah.
With everything that you've done. It's been so interesting listening to you.
We've been very lucky.
So if somebody came along who was you 4 years ago and wanted to set up an organisation, what would you say to them? What would be your key tip?
Just follow your gut and work really hard, and always just listen to everyone around you, and always work in partnerships, and never think you know best, but always follow your gut and your instinct, and I don't know. I would
be brave.
Be brave.
Wow.
Yeah. There's also an element to this that there was just a moment in time. I don't know if this lucky is not the right word because it's so awful that this situation exists, but it was a moment in time, and that's why this exists in the way that it does. But yeah, I don't know. I think the naivety of it was very important.
Well, I just can't help but take my hat off to you, Josie. You've done an amazing job, and you've inspired so many millions of people around the world of all ages. That's the other thing that's been so brilliant about Help Refugees. You've got really old people, really young people from all backgrounds.
It's so nice. They inspire us. Like, honestly, it is a movement. It's not a charity with a nucleus here. It's a movement, and it only exists because people are choosing love everywhere.
And actually, if anybody listening hasn't looked at the Help Refugees website, it is so interactive, and the voice of all your donors and the people who support you and the people who donate pro bono stuff and cash and everything else, they're there on the website. So when you say it's a movement, you're super engaged with everybody, aren't you?
That's
and you
so
really
nice. I hope
tell
so.
that story very well. So is there anything that you particularly want our listeners to do that can help you, apart from buying a nice Choose Love t-shirt?
Yeah, so the obvious things are, you can buy a Choose Love t-shirt on ASOS, you can donate on our website. Please buy things in the Choose Love shop this Christmas. And you can also find out about volunteering on our website. But I guess also in just a wider sense, like, there has never been a more important time to be engaged than now. And everyone can do something. And it doesn't necessarily be around the refugee crisis. It might be around the environment. It might be around homelessness. But, like, no one should ever feel that they can't make a difference, because everyone can. And just always believe in yourself, and we all have a responsibility to right now.
Well, Josie Naughton, co-founder of Help Refugees and Choose Love, and chief executive as well. You've been on an amazing social founder journey, and we're very privileged to have heard you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Caroline. I'm privileged to have spent the time with you.
Oh, that's great. Well, good luck with everything. We wish you all the very best of luck, and we will absolutely promote you as much as we possibly can through our network as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who supported us.
Oh, that's great. Many thanks again to Josie Naughton, Chief Executive and co-founder of Help Refugees and their brand Choose Love. You can connect with Help Refugees on Facebook at Help Refugees UK and on Twitter and Instagram at Choose Love. And you can visit Help Refugees' virtual shop to buy a gift for a refugee, or pop in person if you are in London, New York and Los Angeles. If you go to www.choose.love, you'll find information about how to shop and how to visit. Do stay in touch with us, and please support Help Refugees as much as you can. That's it for today. Thanks so much for listening to Social Founder Stories. I'll really look forward to your feedback. Do subscribe to the podcast. We have some fantastic guests coming up. You can also sign up to our newsletter on our website, www.socialfounder.org. Then you can hear about our events, blogs, and founder stories. You can follow us on Twitter at Social Founders, and if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please do leave us a great 5-star review. This will really help spread the word. And of course, if you are a social founder, or even thinking of becoming one, let me know. Thanks again, Caroline at Social Founders. Social Founder Stories is brought to you by the Social Founder Network in association with Kiva, the Centre for Innovation in Voluntary Action. You can find out more about Kiva and support their innovative work at www.kiva.org.